Good evening and welcome to the Inclusion Ireland Connect Family Network webinar this evening on raising resilience. Before we get started, I would like to say that in reflection on the many queries that come into Inclusion Ireland, we thought that initially taking your inquiries and putting them into some type of information webinar would be useful. But as we met with individuals, as you see here on the screen, who have walked the walk, who've talked the talk, people who really get it, it came clear to us that what we wanted to share tonight was how it is that we raise resilience. The system is complex, and many of your questions reflected that. And so I'd like you to know tonight that if your question is not answered, the one that you submitted during the registration time, we will be getting back to you. We will have resource page that is issued, and any particular questions I will take on to answer myself in the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much for putting your time and energy into those questions. What to expect this evening, I wanted to say in the background are my colleagues, Emer and Alex, who will be doing the technology and Q&A. The Q&A will be open if you would like to put questions in as we go. We may not get to them this evening as we have 1 hour and we have a pretty packed and delightful schedule for you this evening. It will be recorded and the recording will be sent on to you. So where we'll begin tonight is our CEO of Inclusion Ireland, Derval, will give us an Inclusion Ireland welcome. And then we'll move into our subject tonight in looking at raising resilience. So Derval.
Thank you, Patria, for that introduction. I'm not going to speak too long for this evening because I am so thrilled that we have such a fantastic lineup of speakers and panelists. So I won't hold too much of the time, but I just wanted to take a moment or two to give you a warm Inclusion Ireland welcome. We're so delighted to be here with you this evening. For those of you who don't know much about Inclusion Ireland, we're the national advocacy organisation for people with an intellectual disability and their families. And our sole purpose is to work towards the full inclusion of people with intellectual disability by supporting people to have their voices heard and advocating for people's rights under the United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. And people often ask us, so why the focus on human rights? Because as we know, they're about something very fundamental. They speak to how we value people in this country. And unfortunately, many people with intellectual disability and their families right now find it incredibly challenging to access some pretty basic fundamental rights. And that can leave people feeling isolated or devalued or alone. So when we talk about resilience, it's not about shying away from that fact that sometimes things are hard. It's actually about acknowledging that fully so that we can begin to imagine and accept that what is in front of us and to create a vision for what a better life could or should look like. And our team at Inclusion Ireland, we are mainly disabled people and family members of disabled people. And this means that our work is both political as we lobby for better and for change with our policymakers and our politicians, but it's also deeply, deeply personal to us. So for anyone who joined this evening who is not feeling that resilient this evening, we see you. And we understand and we walk alongside you. And we hope that this evening opens up a conversation that brings you some comfort and hope. And that's what we're about at Inclusion Ireland. I'll hand you back to Patria now, and I hope you enjoy this evening.
Thank you, Derval. Just so that you know, as you listen, we've had over 120 people register for this event tonight. And it just gives you an idea of the community across Ireland that is with you here this evening. I'd like to introduce our presenter this evening. Pamela Mansell will present, and then our panelists will share their personal experiences. Pamela is from Future Solutions. She has over 25 years of experience as a social care practitioner, a senior manager, a therapist, coach, and personal advocate. Her natural curiosity and intuition helps her to unlock windows of discovery in others, working in the moment about what is real, working with individuals, families, and teams. She's passionate about creating relational and trusting spaces for the unique individual to have a capacity-oriented, validating space to live in the wholeness of who they are. Throughout her career, Pamela has been committed to innovation and development of self-directed support models that truly honor the person and their vision. And I'm delighted now for Pamela to lead us in a portion of presentation. We'll move into our panelists, and then Pamela will end with us with our final slide. So Pamela.
Thank you very much, Patria. Yeah, welcome to everybody. I suppose I'd like to start to just kind of acknowledge some of what Patria said there in terms of my own acknowledgement to both the individual people and the families that I have had the privilege of partnering with over the last number of years, because it is through this partnership and these relationships that they are the ones that have shown me so much around resilience and what it is that resilience means, that kind of definition of resilience. And when we look at that definition, it is that kind of capacity to withstand or successfully adapt to kind of difficult or challenging life experiences that have been thrown at them throughout the years. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, as Patria said this morning. And one of the areas that we're going to start with is just to know, I suppose, before we get into it, that there are kind of 5 key areas that we can have a look at. And when we move into our panelists here, our family members, they're going to speak to this a little bit more. But the piece that was key, that as Patria talked about, that we felt that it would be remiss of us to kind of start into a journey of resilience and wondering what that would be like. It would be remiss to do that without acknowledging those difficult and challenging life experiences that we know have been, people have had to withstand. And we know that these have been kind of patterns of experiences. And so, when we met together, we were kind of having that discussion about that kind of trauma. And we know that lots of these lived experiences, as you can see from the questions that you have generated, means that there's a shared commonality around some of this, and it can feel very lonely. And there are times that, I have sat with families and even ourselves here as panelists, we kind of sat together and you can wonder about, what is it and how is this happening to me? And you can question, is this really happening? Some of the things that you're kind of confronted with within the system and its strength, it can feel like that question, you can feel quite alone in it. And so we wanted to start at that point, I suppose, of acknowledgement in terms of understanding, as Derval even outlined there this morning, that, the model of service that we are finding ourselves within is a historical model, one that is quite stuck in terms of where its viewpoint sits, in terms of where our mindset sits, and in terms of how it is not actually designed to kind of figure out and create some of those kinds of innovative ways to individually support people and families. And so when we know that we have this model that's quite focused on deficiency and difference, that kind of devalued focus can mean that we have those patterns of experiences, with the key point being that you're not alone in this. There has been an impact, and there will be that impact of devaluation. And I suppose it is that impact and traveling through that impact of trauma over the years that I have been supporting families with for many years now at this point. So when we looked at the patterns, even ourselves together as panelists, some of the family members that are here were saying, that makes so much sense. And this is from the work of Wolf Wolfensberger that I have trained under for many, many years, in terms of applying something to this, system and sector that sometimes can feel quite confusing. And it made a lot of sense. And then the more that I was chatting with families, the more that continued to make sense. And so some of the ones that we wanted to kind of share with you, and interestingly, why he calls these kind of lived experiences wounding, because of how it shows up for you. It does, trauma does feel like that, you know, when you kind of are confronted with something, a challenge, and you're trying to get past it. These are some of the kinds of things that kind of stay with us. The one that we start with is that kind of definition of your life by the circumstances that you find yourself in. And obviously the social model of disability is that our world is what it is that's disabling us, as opposed to it being the other way around. And yet we know that, you know, families and individuals have their entire identity shrunk into these kind of individual characteristics that then dictate kind of all aspects of their life, and indeed possibilities. That loss of control that we know time and time again in terms of decisions being made for families, for individual people, really life changing types of decisions being made, and having no feeling of control over that. Being shaped, and the information that surrounds you being shaped into a single story, often of quite a negative viewpoint, in terms of, you know, being very, you know, strong kind of narratives around, you know, family members, in terms of being that kind of overly protective or too pushy, or, you know, even in terms of individual people, that kind of lack of capacity, very easily being leaned into without being able to see the potential. The deprivation of the ordinariness and everyday experiences that we know that when we look to our neighbours, to our other sons and daughters, to community, we see that those things are present, and yet sometimes it can be a real difficulty, and they also are patterns of experiences. The loss of relationships that we can experience, and that families and individuals can experience, because of the demands of what it is that might be required on them. And so, and lastly, being treated, as I mentioned earlier on, in ways that just would simply not be tolerated, including lots of examples that I have unfortunately walked beside families with, in terms of being excluded out of conversations, separated within meetings, you know, those kinds of offensive tone and language that's been used, and you kind of walk away thinking, did that really happen? So it is something to kind of lean into, that these are the kinds of patterns of experiences that are being kind of derived by these kind of low expectations, in terms of the limitations as opposed to the possibilities. So this is a really great kind of graphic that I found from a lady called Wendy Strove, who was a parent in Australia. I'd say, you know, probably 12 or 15 years ago, she was struck with this kind of separate pathways, one that she could see for her son or daughter, who didn't have any impact of disability, and the other, and how quickly, you know, the language around her son, who had an impact of disability, changed quite readily. And all of those kinds of things leaning into those experiences of limitations and low expectations, and even the language being very directive in terms of a direction of travel that she should take, and not really taking into account what it is her son had to offer the world. It's really helpful also for us to know that very recently there was a piece of research that has been published by Dr. Deirdre O'Loughlin within UL, that also speaks to these same patterns of experiences. And although that research that I acknowledged earlier on is from many, many years ago, that enduring nature, that persistent feeling of being stuck within the system, was written about by Dr. Deirdre O'Loughlin, who had done this kind of research, and this kind of feeling of, will this ever change? And how is it that I get back on track in terms of the lifetime where I get to be in charge of these kinds of decisions, and be able to move away from these kinds of crisis points? So again, just acknowledging that these are the kinds of things that we find ourselves kind of grappling with. And so our human service system historically has kind of continually tended to go around in circles. And so it can feel like that we're just kind of swimming against the tide an awful lot of the time. And so that acknowledgement of where we're starting from is where we wanted to acknowledge today those real experiences that we know that possibly all of you, if not some of you, have come across. But we want to move now into the panelist in terms of looking at what does that look like? What are the kinds of things that we can do? And that's where we're going to come back to. So I'm going to come back again later on. But for now, I'm going to hand over our panelists, who are going to talk about their lived experiences, and hope to share some of that with you.
Thank you, Pamela, for setting the foundation. And I'm delighted now to move into our panelists. What I will do is I will pose questions to each of our panelists, giving them an opportunity to speak to their varied and wide lived experience. that I think you'll find very, very valuable. I'd like to introduce them first, however. First, we have Tracy Holmes. Tracy is a full-time mom to her 3 boys, Harry, and twins Theo and Freddie. She and her family live in Wicklow. She's also the author of the best-selling memoir, Raising Resilience. She's a passionate advocate for maternal mental health. One of her sons, Freddie, has Down syndrome. Tracy prides herself in being an advocate for him and for the Down syndrome community as a whole. And then we have another Tracy, Tracy Carroll. Tracy is a passionate parent advocate, dedicated to being a champion for the rights of children with educational needs and disabilities while supporting their caregivers. She and her family live in Meath. She is graciously and tirelessly shares her experience to help empower families to navigate the complexities of disability and caregiving. She strives to create a balance of a supportive community for parents and carers alike. Next, we have Suzanne Bradley. Suzanne is a mother, a wife, a daughter, sister, aunt, dog owner, friend, a neighbor, and occupational therapist. She and her family live in Galway. She spent over 25 years supporting children and their families with developmental differences and has worked in the public and private sector. She's passionate about partnering with parents and families in a different way to provide places for parents to realize their own expertise. So thank you for the 3 of you for being here this evening. I'd like to begin with Tracy Holmes. Tracy, maybe you can let us know, what does resilience mean to you?
Hi, it's lovely to be here. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so it's a funny one because to me, resilience sounds like such a positive word. You know, to be resilient is a good thing, but the truth is resilience often comes from a place of trauma, pain, or deep uncomfortable learning. And resilience is what we gain on the other side of that. For me, that was the case anyway, when my twins were born and we received a postnatal Down syndrome diagnosis for one of them, Freddie. He also had medical complexities, which saw him spend his first year of life in hospital, separated from his family and his twin brother. And although we came through that time and Freddie is medically well now, and I feel like myself, Freddie, and the rest of our family are resilient because of our experience, I know that it doesn't end there. As society will often always throughout our lifespan go through times of trauma, pain, uncomfortable learning. And it means that even though when we're resilient on the other side of those, we'll be tested time and time again, and therefore resilience will be gained time and time again. And in the case of what we're talking about tonight, advocacy and fighting the system, resilience is going to be tested regularly amongst those times.
Thank you, Tracy. That was a wonderful lead-in. Speaking of resilience is something that we as a team have talked about for weeks now. And I think you've pointed out really well how resilience is a journey. And we're all at different places on that journey. Thank you. Tracy Carroll, how can you be resilient when you're grieving the life that you expected?
Yeah, so Willow was born on the 1st of December 2016, and Willow suffered a catastrophic brain injury at birth. So the beginning of her life was, we were told, was going to be the end. And the time passed and Willow survived. And it's a very strange feeling, and it's not something you're actually aware of, I think, until you've come through it. You have a living person in your hands. You have a child that you hoped for, but you're grieving that life because it wasn't the life you expected, and nothing is how you envisioned it. And there is this massive fear for how you're going to move forward. And we're programmed to value life based on perception of what our social norms are, and how a person presents physically is how they're valued, and we forget to see that in a person. So in truth, I really wasn't aware that I was grieving until that time has passed, when I felt like I wasn't being strangled by those feelings anymore, that the pressures of society, or, the norms that we live kind of to be present in, that I just removed myself from feeling the need to present that way ourselves, that I actually said, oh my God, I've just come through this really, really dark, difficult space. And I validated those feelings. And there was one significant time that really always stood out in my mind, is when we went to the zoo lights. Willow had just turned 1, and I was exhausted. I just couldn't even physically walk around. And I just felt so sad and so low. And I did not know why I was feeling like that. And I just wanted to go home. And I realized, that I was really in this deep space of grief. And acceptance was when I started to change how I felt, accepting this little person that was in my arms, who I probably had lost so much time loving because I was so afraid. And I was grieving every time, every week that went by, month that went by, we were cherishing that time we still had with her. And then we realized that Willow was going to be here to stay. You started thinking forward to, the expectations and what the milestones she was going to miss, the change in circumstances. Every time there was a new piece of medical equipment, you felt like you were being dragged back into that space again. But even though Willow's life started in grief, I was already there, yet I didn't know it. And I suppose I was, as Tracy would say, you're building resilience as you go. And it's difficult. It's really difficult to navigate that space and to acknowledge it. But the first thing really is just to allow that and allow it being uncomfortable, and actually realize that this is completely normal, that every parent is going through this same space with you, is feeling those feelings, and it is okay. And just allow yourself, that time. And I spent so long thinking down the line and expecting, the norms, that I just accepted what we had and felt her breath and held her and just felt that inner person, and just let us be as we were in the here and the now.
Thank you, Tracy. It's quite the picture, and the vulnerability is much appreciated, because it's very, very real, very honest. Suzanne, how do you build resilience for yourself and your family with small, practical steps?
Thank you, Patria, and it's really lovely to be here with these amazing people, and it's been such a lovely time spending time over the last few weeks getting ready for this. And I think that I suppose I've been an OT for a long time. I haven't been a mum for as long, and one of the things that in my work I would always have done is seen the child. And then suddenly when our story changed and I was sitting the other side of the table, I realized, oh my God, I can't do this on my own. And then I looked around, and who was around me but my family? Imagine, you have a team. So one of the things that was really important for me and my husband and our 3 kids was, how are we going to do this together? And it started with just, how are we all together now? So, because not everybody has a good day, not everybody has a bad day. And it doesn't always have to be about, our kiddie, with developmental differences. I think that one of the things that often happens in our house is that it's often not me that they seek support from, it's a sibling. And I'm like, it's okay for me to step aside and let that happen. Because, I think, when Tracy talks to the grief is significant. And, I'm the person that's supposed to have all of the answers. I'm this person that's supposed to know, because I've been doing this forever. And suddenly I didn't have the answer, and it was really, really difficult. And did I wait too long to get support? Did I get support in the right place? Did I miss something? Am I missing something? Am I blind to it? And I think that having my team around me, which is my family, meant that we were resilient together. And what that looked like for one of the family was different from the other. But, when my kiddie was having a really, really bad day, it often meant that somebody else would step in and say, okay, I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to be with you. And that's okay. And you know that analogy, when you get on the plane, put on your own mask first, your own oxygen mask first. I think that is, for me, we have to live by that and then track everybody else. You know, and I think that's one of the biggest things that I've learned. And as I partner with parents now, is who's with you on this journey, and lean into that support, because that's really, really, really important, because you're not on your own. You're not on your own. And it's okay to have a bad day. I think that's it's that self-compassion, and you don't have to have all of the answers. So thank you.
That's a good number of practical steps, Suzanne. I particularly like the leaning, that we all need to lean in. It's a good reminder. I know that we often need again and again. Back to Tracy Holmes. Tracy, your son Freddie had a very difficult start in life. How did and how do you protect your energy and your mental well-being, and why do you feel this is important?
Yeah, I feel it's very important, but it took me a huge amount of time to learn that, and that in order to look after myself and look after my family, I really had to mind myself as well, especially when you have a child with additional needs. It comes with a lot, takes a lot out of you. It's funny because one of my notes that I made around this question was what Suzanne just touched on, you know, that age-old tale of fitting your own oxygen mask first. You know, it's so true. But it's not always, it doesn't feel natural to do that. Your instinct is to always feel the need to put your children first. And it isn't always possible. And despite knowing that, for me, putting myself in a priority list, it didn't happen for a really long time. And I learned that the hard way when I hit a mental health breakdown in 2021, after the boys had been separated for 3 months, and I was living life at the hospital and at home, a toddler as well, on top of the twins. And I needed to visit a mental health institution, and I needed to go on medication. And really, from that point, from being at rock bottom, I knew that I needed to lean on the support. I knew that I needed to talk. I knew I needed to take the medication. I knew I needed to take everything around me in order to support myself. And it didn't come natural to me. So it took me a really long time to reach out and ask for that support and make those changes. And I like to use the phrase filling up my reserves, because a lot of people throw around the word self-care. And for me, it just doesn't sit right, because I feel like self-care, the word self-care gives the connotation of, you know, massages and spa days. And, you know, for me, it feels more fitting to say fill up your reserves, because that's really what you're doing, is taking time for yourself. You're filling yourself up in order to be able to give more. And for me, those things are like getting in nature every day, or exercising where I can, or picking up the phone and talking to a friend when I'm feeling like I'm having a really hard day. And just those simple things for me just give me that little bit more in the tank to be able to give. And one thing I talked about in my book that, you know, if I can really summarize it, for me, it was the 3 C's: conversation, connecting, and community. And that conversation piece comes up around talking, around just opening up the conversation when things are hard, and just vocalizing that. And then connecting. So connecting with the people around me, connecting with people who've been through similar struggles, people who just get it, and just reaching out and finding those people. And alongside that, then community. And for me, the community is the Down syndrome community. And also Freddie is still on a very long tube feeding journey. So, you know, we're still almost 4 years later, still exclusively tube feeding. So for me, that community piece for me as well is that community. And just surrounding myself around those people, where on those days where you need somebody who gets it, and you need to have that conversation, and you need to vocalize the hard times, because as amazing as family can be, and I'm very lucky as well, like Suzanne said, I'm very lucky with family support, but they don't always get it. So having those people in your corner that you can turn to, I feel is really, really important. So making that step out is key.
Thank you, Tracy. That's a good segue for me to lead into the Connect Family Network. You know, they're reaching out. Inclusion Ireland offers on the webpage what's called the Connect Family Network. And within that network, there are various support groups from throughout Ireland. So it may be valuable when you have a moment and you'd like to reach out to link in there to some of those people who do get it. So thank you for that. Tracy, Carroll, how do you bounce back and move on, particularly when you feel that you're failing your child and failing? Can you give me an example of when resilience helped you to overcome adversity?
I think I just needed some resilience there, as Noah was trying to bargain me to let him watch the PlayStation. The joy of parenting. I suppose as parents, we are absolutely our own worst critics, and the inner voice can be so ugly. But when you care for a child with additional needs, there is so much more added to it. There's like tinge of regret, sorrow, and absolute shame. You can be ashamed of your own feelings. You can be ashamed of when you're in public and you might see people kind of glance sideways at you or people being uncomfortable around you. And I'd be very open, you know, I like people to ask me questions, but, you know, it can be really difficult. And, you know, you need resilience in those times, not to react and be, you know, respond to someone else's negativity. And the system breaks you. You literally fight for every single thing from the moment you start, from the day you entered this parallel. I actually sometimes refer to like it's like being in Hogwarts. You're always on, you know, platform 2 3/4. You're never on the same stage as anyone else. You're always looking across. So you constantly feel like you're failing your child because you can't live, you know, that on the same platform as everybody else. But we have to remind yourself it's society that is disabling our children. It's the society that has really challenged us every day, and we are doing our absolute best as a parent. There's days that can be absolutely just really, really difficult. And when I, as a person, as a human being, just hasn't done my best, and we face really unpleasant situations, and in that moment, you don't feel that you can find your voice or that you can advocate your best at that time. And you just have to be kind to yourself and, you know, in that build the resilience to know that you're going to learn from that experience. And that's life, because we all make mistakes and we're all not game on every single day. And it's the same for every single family, every parent. Our children are actually born to challenge us, to try and break down those boundaries, to challenge, you know, everything as they grow and as they learn. And so I've just kind of adapted our life to kind of move with that. You know, it's the same for Willow as it is for Noah. He has a very much different experience of life than Willow. She's just happy floating along, but her challenges are, you know, the new wheelchair that I have to face that she gets. And I feel like, oh God, why couldn't we just find something else that's a little bit different? Or with Noah being neurodiverse, his experiences around peers and, you know, around friendships. And when I feel, you know, I haven't given them the tools to deal with the situation, I feel like I've failed. But we always sit and we learn and we talk from it. And I know that the next time I face a challenge, as circumstances change with Willow as she grows, that we're going to learn from that experience and be able to bring that on and just accept the fragility of your emotions and how sometimes they just hold you today, not the way you want to feel, but you know that you've experienced that, you're going to learn from it, and then hopefully tomorrow you'll wake up feeling a little bit stronger and know that when you face another challenge, you just have brought that learned experience to it.
Thank you, Tracy. That's a mantra, I think, for all of us, to be kind to ourselves. Suzanne, might you tell us, how do you build resilience when times are hard?
I think there's so much good stuff happening in this conversation from people. It's incredible. So one of the things I like to say is that times are going to be hard a lot. And for us, it's to acknowledge that, you know, like just an example today, you know, comes in the door from school, and I tend, for my own resilience, what I tend to do is I'm cooking. So I tend to just sort of be distracted so that it's not an avalanche of questions and all of that. So, but the minute he came in the door into the couch and started jumping on the couch, and I knew, right, okay, we've had a moment here, something's happened. And what I used to do is try and talk about it, figure it out, what's happened, what's going on. And it's the worst thing, because what that would do is that would escalate all of us. We would all get escalated, and then it would take an awful lot longer to come back down. So now what we do is we stop, we're slow, let it happen. And then what happens is that when they're ready, they'll come and they'll talk. And that's what happened was wanted a movement break in school and couldn't have it. And then trying to figure out, well, what can you do now that you're at home? I see that you've used some lovely skills around bouncing. I know you love to bounce and punching the cushions, and always a good thing to have tons of cushions and tons of soft surfaces just in the natural environment, so that's what what he can do when he needs to do that. And that's one of the things for me to learn, and I have learned, is that resilience is this sort of a zone. And and Tracy talked about that, just so both Tracys have talked about that so beautifully, is that it's like there's this range of I'm okay but I feel rotten, I'm okay but I feel really well. And it's that space of it's not easy, but I can function, and that's okay today. So when you get to the end of the day, all you have really is what's happened that day. You don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. You don't know what's going to happen next week. So you just let that happen, because it's going to happen regardless. But right now, what has happened today that we can lean into or learn from or take as an experience or reflect with the kids? Like, I love doing that and say, gosh, this happened today. How did you feel? Was it okay? I'm lucky, we've loads of language in our house. So there is, that ability to express, how we're feeling and what didn't go so well. I think is important. And I will always say, well, I didn't manage that well, did I? I probably could have done that a little bit differently. But tomorrow, I might do it differently, and that's okay. It's about everybody being okay with how it is. And again, the ladies have talked about that self-compassion is so important, and kindness, and that's one of the things I think it's important that when we, because often the focus is on the child, and I think we need to sort of talk about, well, it was hard for me too. Today's been hard for me too. So yeah, thank you.
That's lovely, Suzanne. The honesty with ourselves. Very important. Tracy, Holmes, what challenges do you and your family face in terms of access to services, and how do you find you build resilience within these challenges?
Yeah, I feel like it's a constant battle. As Freddie did have a long stay in hospital, like a year in hospital. When we got discharged and we came home, he did get physio straight away because he was quite behind from a milestone point of view in his physical abilities. But I did find, even though we were receiving the community physio, that the quality of the appointments weren't great. They were very few and far between, and the services are very understaffed and under-resourced. So therefore, I could sense that, that it was very rushed, and we didn't get them often. So we did have to invest in private physio where we could, and that was just to make sure that we could help Freddie along as best we could. We've also never received OT from our community services, and that's another really important therapy for Freddie. Now, as we are based in Wicklow and Freddie does have Down syndrome, we have access to the Down Syndrome Centre in Dublin, which is an amazing facility to have access to. But, we also still have to pay for that. And we also find that because we do have the Down Syndrome Centre, we don't get prioritised for a lot of services within the community services. And a lot of my peers in the Down syndrome community would feel that way as well. So I feel like fighting for services is just something that is always going to be ongoing for us. In terms of building resilience around that, I feel like it comes back to resilience always being tested. Sometimes I don't have the fight in me and things slide because I'm human and I have other children's needs to meet, and I have my own reserves to keep in check to make sure that I can be the best, most functioning mother I can be. And then on other days, I feel like I can take on the world. And that's on those days where the emails get sent and the appointments get followed up and, stuff gets done. But I think it's really important to remember that on those days, on the good days, on the bad days, that we're doing the absolute best we can. And I also feel like we always need to remind ourselves and remember that a nurturing home environment is as important for our children that as these services, that we're fighting for. So knowing that, like, even on the days where we are fighting, that by being at home with our children, by doing the best we can by them, by siblings if they have them, that they're still learning and that they're still growing in that environment. And I also feel that regularly reminding myself that I'm not alone really helps. That it can often feel like when you have a child with additional needs that you feel quite lonely and you can feel quite disconnected. But I know that, like, with 14,000 children still on wait lists waiting for assessments, we're far from alone. And I feel like on the days where I'm really struggling and I'm feeling like I am alone, reminding myself of that, as angry as it makes me as well, it really does help knowing that you aren't alone. So yeah.
Thank you, Tracy. Bringing in that big picture is often very important. And Tracy, Carroll, how do you learn to be your own guide, to listen to your intuition when the medical voice is so loud, when the pressure is so intense?
I suppose it's shifting that mindset to move away from the medical model of care. To remember first that I was a parent and nobody knows your own child like you do. And when your child has a disability, you're so surrounded by everything with the medical side. We have a huge team of people that look after Willow's care, and then her disability network team and her seating appointments, and it all is very much medically driven. But as I said, Willow was sent home to die when she was 4 days old. We had a coffin picked, we had her funeral planned, we were given no hope of survival. But I always had that inner voice that kept saying she's not going anywhere. And she is probably as stubborn as me. So I'd say she was born resilient, and continues to prove to us how resilient she is and shows us to be resilient. There was a DNR on Willow. We removed that DNR and literally we hit the ground running. I took off like a woman possessed. I always wanted to be Wonder Woman, so I think I really just went with that note. And we sought out alternative therapies. We researched everything that we could do to bring any intervention that would enhance her life. It was incredibly intense, like caught in a whirlwind, and the debris of your life that you expected was just literally smashing around you. Your life literally was gone in a puff from where you were to where you're here now, and it was trying to pull all those pieces back together and reshape your life. It really was about rebuilding from where we were to where we are now. And I'll be honest with you, and people find this bizarre, I've never been happier in my life. It was literally like just blowing my world apart, and me having to find a new person in myself and listening to that intuition and really seeing Willow. She has the funniest little personality. Her care is really 24/7, and it is working to keep her alive. But her resilience is something that I've learned from. So you leave the medical view inside the office of all those medical people and the paperwork, and you just see Willow. Really see her, hold her, feel her, just be her mum. And just finding her voice, because she communicates differently, and just listening to that inner person, seeing her cues, learning how she communicates, and just really listening to yourself. And I would say that to everybody when I meet medical people. I was like, if you have an intuition about something, listen to that before you choose the medical side. And she's 8. she's flying. She has full autonomy. She makes her choices and she makes herself known. And she's taught me how to be resilient. That's how I will end this.
We have teachers around us. Thank you, Tracy. Suzanne, if your child can easily become dysregulated, how can you support them to recognize their own resilience in that situation?
I just have to say I'm so inspired. It's just listening to the two Tracys. Oh my gosh, it's such rich company I'm in. Thank you. So I suppose this, for me as an occupational therapist, this is a question I get asked all of the time. And then, you know, and also it's a very, very personal thing, because this would have been something that I see, it's easier now for us, but I saw it so much, and like thinking, oh my God, I've all of the book knowledge. How the heck do I do this in my life? Looking at the struggle that what dysregulation actually looks like in somebody that came out of me was just really, really hard. And I remember thinking, okay, you know, Suzanne, you know, big girl pants on now, you know, let's do this. And what I did was we stopped and let it happen and just sat. So one of the things I would do would sit outside the bedroom door, because not allowed inside the bedroom. So you'd sit outside the bedroom door on the floor and just say, I'm here, and nothing else. And then you'd wait, you know, maybe things would stop being thrown around the room. And, you know, you'd obviously be sure that they were safe. And then, you know, you might open the door just a crack and say, how are you now? You know, but it just made me stop and made me really think about, you know, what do I need? What do they need right now? Right now. And that's all it needs to be. We don't need to fill the room with language. We don't need to fix anything, because nothing is broken. This is a moment in time. We can repair it. And for me, the most powerful thing I did was just to be there, just to be present. And then as time went on, as I was able to be present and okay, so my nervous system wasn't like, oh, rattle, 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 because I wanted to fix and I wanted to, you know, stop it. But I thought, actually, that's not my job. It's my job is to be here so that they can build resilience around when it's not okay. It's okay to react, and this is how I recover, and this is how I repair. And now, luckily, we have strategies that he can use, and always, you know, when he feels better, we acknowledge the strategy and we say, wow, that was amazing. Gosh, you know, this is your menu. These are the recipes around feeling better. And that was just fantastic. So I think that's, for me, the dysregulated piece, and being able to be resilient within that, because that's part of, we all get dysregulated, you know, and we can all be resilient with that. So yeah.
Thank you, Suzanne. There's so much in what everyone has said here this evening. Each one of our panelists could take the full hour, and I'm sure we'd be all very interested and engaged with your lived experience. I'm leaving it now to Pamela. She's going to pull this together with the final piece of her presentation. Pamela.
Sorry, 2 seconds. I was so deeply engrossed that I forgot I turned off all my all my pieces. 2 seconds there now, guys. Let me get off to where we were. But yeah, as you've heard, there's so many pieces. I'm going to start here because I know that Tracy, you talked about your C's, and they fit into all of the C's here that are spoken about and written about, but you talk about it in such a real way in terms of, you know, that kind of filling up of the reserve, filling up the well of what it is that we've got to offer. And you've all spoken about, you know, not forgetting our connections, not forgetting to conversate and communicate with people around us and know we're not alone. Not forgetting that this is something that is learned, and we have to lean into that. This requires the building of skills as we go and as we learn and as our kids teach us and as we figure something out and have conversations with friends and family. It's in the learning of it, and obviously the commitment is around the acknowledging. And I one of the two Tracy's talked about, you know, just having that time to give to yourself, because, and both actually yourself, Suzanne and Tracy, talked about the putting on of the mask first and your own oxygen, that commitment to yourself, because, you know, without yourselves, you can't kind of move into it. But we really wanted to kind of round up tonight with some of that kind of hope, some of that, yes, whilst that is our starting point, it is possible. We can move in. We don't have to, you know, just take the parts of the system that we know are broken and start from that point. We can start at lots of other different places. And the ordinariness of what it is that we call life, you know, the way that Tracy Carroll just kind of talked about, you know, that kind of blowing up of what it is that can be paved out in front of you and starting something afresh with the ordinariness of the kind of things that all of us look to, the very nature in which we receive and get love and respect and, you know, home and health, whatever it is that that looks like, and the trusting of our gut to say that we know these things are present. These are kinds of the things that we lean into all of the time. We get access to all of the time, but unfortunately sometimes, you know, the system can say that these kinds of things are out of reach. Well, they're not, and we can kind of sit into those as kind of places to start. And for our children, that just looks like, Suzanne, some of what you talked about, that kind of the feeling of safety and value that we know our family and friends can offer to us. Encouragement to do the small things, the big things, the things that are their things to do, and know that they build their confidence in those kinds of ways, make their own choices and have autonomy, whatever way that looks. Play with our friends, have opportunities to learn and participate in ways that look like typically ordinary ways within community. And we can lean into those kinds of valued experiences so that we get to, you know, teach potentially our sons and daughters, or, you know, role model to them the who am I. And some of the questions leaned into that in terms of coming in for the webinar. You know, how do I, you know, teach that confidence to my son or daughter? How do I help those kinds of commonalities within siblings? How do I, you know, support people who may feel overly anxious in some places, and how do I help them figure this out? And for my work with families, myself, my own family, and individual people, it's starting with this question of who am I and what is it that I've got to offer the world? Where is it and what more do we need to discover so that we arrive at this point of, well, this is who I am. And so we wanted to leave you with a couple of resources that we know are those springboards into the ordinariness of community, the ordinariness of the we that sometimes can feel out of touch. And so these three areas help us to start with, not only, and it happens for both ourselves. I've done these many at a time, the thing that we're going to move into. I've done it for my son. I've done it with lots of families and individual people in terms of, well, what have we got to offer the world? What are the gifts that my son or daughter or I indeed have to offer the world, and my qualities? What are the areas that motivate me? And how is it that I know that I'm at my best? And I really wanted to lean into the panelists' experiences there of trusting your gut and knowing what you know, because it's happening in front of you every day, as opposed to waiting for others to tell you what it is that might be the best for your son or daughter. We get to start when we can start this process. And so one of the ways that we do that is that shifting of capacity. We're naturally leaning into our instincts to want to see more and better. And unfortunately, the system can keep us stuck over on the other side. And so when we lean into this, more is possible. And one resource that I've used is a resource called a one-page profile. And really what it is an opportunity to figure out on one page what it is about your son or your daughter, or indeed yourself. As I said, I've used these in different ways. They would look different depending on age profile. What the kinds of things that people love and adore about us or about your son or daughter, the kinds of things that, you know, make them tick. What is it lights their fire, makes them happy? And what are the kind of specificity around how they might need to be at their best? Not necessarily just about support, but in terms of, you know, environment and who they like around them, the kind of personal preferences that they have in terms of how they enjoy their days. And so there's lots of different ways, and we're going to have this up and be able to circulate this later on. But it really is about knowing and having an opportunity to put down on paper what we already know, and to look at some of the language and say, oh, I never thought about that. But absolutely, my son or daughter, for example, is a resourceful problem solver. They can figure out a way, as Tracy talked about, her daughter taught her the resilience piece, you know, how it is that we can overcome some of these kinds of ways, the kind of the charisma or that intentionality that we know that our son or daughter kind of force us into, the slowing down and the appreciating of the moment. So lots of these kinds of things can go into your one-page profile. Another piece to lean back into Wendy Strove, when you have your one-page profile, thinking about and wondering about, well, what is it, the direction of travel I want to get to? She talks about it's never too early or too late to craft your vision and your son or daughter's vision for their future. What is it they would like their future to look like? And allow yourself to move into big spaces and do it in ways that looks like something that you think your son or daughter can kind of lean into. Their siblings can help them out. We use lots of different ways of figuring that out so that you help them to craft something that's their vision in terms of how they want to lean into. There's different ways that we talk about it. It could be a dream board, a big life board, all about me. What are the kind of things that I want people to know and love about me, and see me, not see my disability, not see some of the ways, the deficiencies, the language that have surrounded me, but truly see who I am inside. And so we've kept up some of those, that kind of vision statement of what it is I envision for in terms of learning and growing and thriving and receiving the kind of supports and knowing that I want to be able to be supported, to be loved and loved by others, to give love, to contribute, to have friendships. So there's lots of things that we use to get to that point, and those visions can be stunted by lack of imagination and those earlier experiences that we talked about, those low expectations. So when we can have that ability, that potential to overlook some of those things, to reimagine, much more is possible. We have to kind of move into some of those places sometimes and reimagine this world, because it can feel quite stuck. And so when we allow ourselves just that space, the blue space there, to kind of wonder about and think through, well, what is the world we hope for and how can we move towards that? These kinds of resources might help you to kind of think that through. You know, Tracy talked about, you know, we know our children best. We want them to be able to be seen. We want to sit beside them and take that time, and hopefully some of these resources can kind of help you to kind of figure that through, wonder about what might that vision be. And as I said, these resources will be there for you afterwards. So yeah, thanks for listening. But these kind of places, as we just acknowledged, is start where we are. It's the only place we can start, is by starting where we are, using what we have, whether it be inside us, our own resilience, our own well of resilience, or that kind of filling up of resources, and then really leaning into, you know, what more is it that we can do, and how is it that we can kind of do what we can in the here and now, rather than being waiting for the right circumstances to kind of come about. So hopefully that kind of draws it together for you all.
Thank you, Pamela. Well, we've reached our 8:30 remarkably. Very well done, everyone. We at Inclusion Ireland would like to thank all of our participants here today, and let you know that this recording and the resource page and other resources you've seen today will be sent on to you in addition to Pamela's slide presentation for you to reflect on, because as we have said, and each person here has said tonight, we realize that resilience is a journey. Resilience is a journey that we're all on, and making those connections, reaching out, leaning in, all of the pieces we've heard today, trusting our intuition, are key to our own resilience and helping others to build their resilience in the community. So I thank Pamela for your presentation here this evening. There's a lot of food for thought, Pamela, Tracy, Suzanne, and Tracy, just for your honesty, your integrity. Sharing your lived experience is hugely valuable. Making it very real tonight in the midst of wherever our listeners might be on their journey of resilience. So thank you very much. And
Thank you.
I look forward to sending the information on to everyone tonight. And I thank the team here tonight for a wonderful job.
Thank you, Patricia. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.